Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. Jody, could you call the roll, please?
Dennis.
Here.
Harold.
Here.
Hollenbaugh.
Here.
Odericio.
Here.
Phipps.
Here.
Robinette.
Here.
Sherry.
Here.
Okay, the minutes of our regular meeting on March 4th. That's not right.
18th.
March 18th have been distributed for your perusal. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Properly moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay. Jody, do we have any correspondence this evening?
We do not.
Okay. That brings us to lobby visitations. Do we have anyone signed up?
Yes, we have one person, Thomas O'Brien.
If you could please come to the podium and state your name and address for the record.
Thomas O'Brien. 415 Pine Valley Drive, Bowling Green. Okay. I would like to address the issue of neighborhood dog parks in Bowling Green. While the idea of a dog park is not objectionable, having one within walking distance for all Bowling Green dog owners is unrealistic. There are few locations in Bowling Green neighborhoods suited for the development of a dog park, and Ridge Park is certainly not one of them. This location was developed as a park for kids, and it is inappropriate to fence off more than half of its area for use as a dog park. As a supporter of Ridge Park as originally conceived, I feel that replacing the baseball or softball space with the dog exercise facility is indefensible. The two backstops at the north end of the space would either have to be removed or stand as a reminder of the intended purpose of Ridge Park. If the beneficiaries of this proposed use are dog owners within reasonable walking distance to Ridge Park, is that fair to the kids and families who now have a ball-playing facility in their neighborhood? If, on the other hand, a large number of dog owners will be willing to drive to the dog park, then it would seem that the existing county dog park off of Gypsy Lane is an already more than adequate facility. This facility charges us an annual fee of $40 and currently has hundreds of subscribers. Driving there and paying this modest fee should not be burdensome for those who are serious about off-leash dog exercise. A number of my dog-owning friends have indicated to me that they have fenced yards that provide exercise space for their dogs and would be unlikely dog park users. This was the case for my family during the 20-plus years that we were Bowling Green dog owners. We would also walk the dog, on leash of course. Several of my children and grandchildren are dog owners. They are located in Cleveland and Washington, D.C., and none has access to a dog park. Some of them take 5-mile walks with their dog to the benefit of both the dog and the walker. High-density cities such as New York and Washington, D.C. would be good dog park candidates, but it would be unlikely that parks in such areas would be within walking distance for many users. If the aim of the BG Dog Owners Group is to have a dog park within walking distance for all prospective users, what is the complete plan? As indicated, in my view, Ridge Park is inappropriate. If this lease is granted, does it provide leverage for dog owners some distance from Ridge to demand a dog park near them? Are there any deed restrictions concerning the use of this property? If the lease conditions are not met or the organization chooses to not renew, will the park be returned to its originally intended use? Existing facilities, the county dog park, should be used and perhaps others should be investigated, but kids' play areas should not be sacrificed for dog parks.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the introduction of new legislation.
Mr. President,
Mr. Robinette.
From the Finance Committee, I have an ordinance amending and adopting Chapter 33 of the codified ordinances of the City of Bowling Green, Ohio regarding employment policies.
Mr. President, from the Transportation and
Harrell.
Safety Committee, I have a resolution providing for a Vision Zero commitment to eliminate fatalities and serious injuries that are a result of crashes on city streets within the City of Bowling Green by 2045. And I have an ordinance amending and adopting Chapter 138 regarding drug offenses and amending and adopting Section 139.10 regarding Clean Air Act of the codified ordinances of the City of Bowling Green, Ohio.
Mr. President,
Member Sherry.
I have an ordinance from the Parks, Recreation, Public Lands, and Buildings Committee, an ordinance authorizing the municipal administrator to enter into a lease agreement with BG Dog Parks and Inc.
I have a litany of items from utilities. Ordinance authorizing utilities director to enter into contracts for the design, engineering, and construction of the water treatment plant membrane improvements. Ordinance authorizing the utilities director to execute an agreement with the Ohio Water Development Authority, OWDA, or the Ohio EPA Water Supply Revolving Loan Account, WSRLA program for the design, engineering, and construction of water treatment plant membrane improvements. Ordinance authorizing the utilities director to enter into contracts for the raw water reservoir expansion study. Ordinance authorizing the utilities director to enter into contract or contracts for the engineering, programming, and construction of substation relay improvements. And an ordinance authorizing the utilities director to enter into contracts for the purchase and sale of vehicles and equipment and declaring an emergency. That brings us to official reports. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, Council. I have no report, but of course, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Are there any questions for the mayor? Okay. Municipal Administrator, Ms. Treader.
Good evening, Council. I need not probably remind you that the solar eclipse will be passing over Bowling Green next Monday, April 8. And as we talked about at the last meeting, our city staff has been preparing for that day to manage increased traffic and visitors in town. And so we certainly appreciate the efforts that they have made. And we want to remind folks as well that we will be delaying trash that week, so it would be on a normal holiday week. So if your trash is normally Monday, it'll be Tuesday and on down the line. The other item I have for you this evening is to request that council go into executive session at the conclusion of your meeting. We would not recommend any action in that executive session, but the purpose will be for preparing for collective bargaining. And as a reminder, when council makes that motion, that does need to be in there per Ohio Open Meetings Acts that you mentioned the reason for the executive session. That completes my report, subject to your questions.
Are there any questions for Ms. Treader this evening? All right, thank you very much. City Attorney, Mr. Brown.
Good evening. Councilman Harold asked that I make a report regarding the marijuana legislation that's set for first reading tonight, and so I am prepared to do that now. I think Lori's summary in the packet of this legislation is a very good one, but that's the short version, and now you're going to hear the longer version. And there is a lot here, and there's a lot to this, so if I do get long-winded, please feel free to interrupt me at any point. But the whole point of all of this was to bring our statute in line with that of the Ohio Revised Code. So as you well know, based on a voter-led initiative, the state of Ohio legalized adult use recreational marijuana And our code needs to mirror that, essentially. This is important because whenever you have a crime that you're going to cite someone for, and it is punishable by a fine, and you're not asking for jail time on that offense, which is the vast majority of our crimes, then you need to have a local municipal ordinance for it, because that money goes to the citing authority. So if we have a BG code for it, then we get the fine money, whereas if you have an Ohio Revised Code section, then the state gets that money. So that's why, for example, when the underage drinking law was changed from an M1 to an M3 some time ago, it was important that we changed our code to mirror that, because we wanted officers citing, I'm getting far away from the mic, we wanted officers citing under the M3 version of our code so that we get that fine money instead of the state. So it's important that we mirror the ORC in this regard for 4 basic scenarios, which is if marijuana is going to be legal, which the voters have said it is, then the important areas are, in my opinion, 4. One would be smoking in public. Another would be smoking indoors in a commercial setting. Another would be use by minors. So the Ohio Revised Code defines it as adult use marijuana, which means anyone over the 21 and over. And the last one would be use by passengers in a motor vehicle. So the goal, again, was to have us address all of those things. And part of the problem here was that the Ohio Revised Code is, in my opinion, a very poorly written one, the whole chapter on this issue. I have a whole presentation that I can give on all the problems with how it was written, but it clearly wasn't written by someone who's used to handling criminal law or writing laws at all. So I can give you an example of that, which is the Ohio Revised Code says something to the effect of there's a blanket prohibition on smoking marijuana in public. Now, this is problematic in the way that it's drafted in the Ohio Revised Code for a few. Number one, it only appears in a penalties section of the law. So imagine it says that you shall not murder, but it only says, it doesn't say you shall not murder anyone in the law. It just says, by the way, if you murder anyone, it's a felony of the first degree. There's no what we call elements of the offense there. So if you went to a hearing or anything and the defense demanded a bill of particulars, there wouldn't be anything to write. Further, they don't define what the public is at any point. So we don't know if that means on a sidewalk, in a business that's open to the public, nothing like that. So the idea is that we can kind of get ahead of those things. We can define what the public is because we have already defined it in other places in our code. So how did we do this? Basically, a couple ways. There's 7 parts here. I'll go through them kind of quickly, but it did somewhat entail an entire rewrite of our drug policy. But the first is we add adult use consumer and adult use cannabis and public places definitions to our definitions section in the drug chapter. Those 3 things are important. The adult use consumer and adult use cannabis both come straight from the ORC. The public places one is one that we defined based on our previous, both our level and state level definitions of public places, but again, it's not defined in this chapter in the ORC. We modify our previous wording for the minor misdemeanor level of marijuana legislation. We add, so most of this chapter that was added after the vote I'd probably say like 75% of it dealt with licensing dispensaries for this. So that's obviously not our business at all, but there is one part of that chapter which deals with what people are allowed and not allowed to do anymore. So we are copying or mirroring much of the language from that subsection. We are removing or editing the old sections regarding marijuana paraphernalia and possession, especially with regards to paraphernalia. Paraphernalia is no longer illegal. We're removing marijuana from Chapter 138.12, which is about basically giving drugs to friends. Under the new Ohio law, as long as you're within the other provisions of the chapter, say with the amounts and all that, you're allowed to give marijuana to friends. They come to your house, you can give it to them just as you can give them a beer. And the final one is adding adult use marijuana to our Clean Air Act. So another part of the problem was that nowhere in the Ohio law, except for the penalty section, did it say you aren't allowed to smoke marijuana in public. But there was this weird statement at the end that says something like, there is a blanket prohibition on smoking in public, a very weirdly written thing in the law, which I expect them to remedy at some point. But the easiest way for us to remedy that on our end, because we know the intent of the law, is to add it to our Clean Air Act, which you can find in our code, which just says you can't smoke tobacco inside public places, which are private businesses but open to the public, except for in, say, smoking rooms. So if we add adult use marijuana to that section of the code, it essentially says you can't smoke cigarettes or adult use marijuana in places that wouldn't allow traditionally tobacco smoke. So that's a lot. There's nothing in here that's different from the Ohio law. There's nothing I feel that goes beyond Ohio law or less than Ohio law. It just takes the important parts that we need to cite and gives us versions of them. So after, if or when this is passed, I can email the chief of police and say, here are the 4 areas in which if someone gets cited, you can cite under our code. And it'll be very clear. Currently, they're operating under this rubric, which was made up by one of the detectives, which, in my opinion, was very well done, but required a lot of work. And it doesn't get us the fine money that you should expect should someone get cited if they're underage or what have you. And that's all I have to say about that.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Brown?
Yeah, Mr. President, thank you so much for that, Hunter. You'd mentioned on the 4th provision, a passenger smoking in a car.
Yes.
I'm assuming that somewhere else the driver is prohibited.
Well, I'm glad you asked. So this is one of those very weird provisions in that chapter where the first part is, yes, a driver can't smoke in the car or else they're subject to the provisions under the driving under the influence section of the Ohio Revised Code, which makes sense. Because we already have that law, you can't be under the influence of anything, including prescribed medications, alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, under Ohio law. But then the next part says, you also can't smoke as a passenger, or else you're subject to the provisions of operating a vehicle under the influence laws in the Ohio Revised Code. This makes no sense, because nothing in our OVI laws pertains to a passenger in a vehicle whatsoever. So we want to make it clear that being a passenger in a vehicle and smoking in a public place, a road, is illegal, which I think was the intent of the Ohio Revised Code, but that's not the way they say it at all.
So you didn't want a secondhand reference to secondhand smoke. You wanted to have it be direct.
Correct, which is, I think, what they were intending.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Brown? All right, thank you very much. Public Infrastructure Director, Mr. O'Connell.
Just 2 updates, really. But I didn't mention it last time. The construction project in the village water line has started, and they're working their way down Jefferson, and will soon be turning to get to the other streets within the village. And the other update is for the South Main Street water line project. That is out for bid now, or will be shortly. And the bid opening is planned for April 18th. So we'll see what those bid results come back at that time. After that work is done, there will be some road transportation work that will be done on South Main as well. So that will be following the water line project. But that's all I have, unless you have other questions.
Are there any other questions, concerns for Brian? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That brings us to council committee reports. Do we have any council committee reports?
Mr. President,
Ms. Phipps?
immediately before tonight's meeting, we held the required public hearing on ordinance 9177. We heard no public testimony nor objections to that ordinance.
Okay.
Mr. President,
Mr. Robinette?
as a reminder, the Finance Committee will be meeting on April 15th at 6:30 PM, just prior to our regular scheduled meeting, for the purpose of receiving the first quarter finance review.
Okay, that somehow seems appropriate on April 15th.
Mr. President,
Mr. Harold?
The Transportation and Safety Committee will have a meeting on April 15th from 6 to 6:30 to discuss the resolution that is being introduced tonight. And prior to the meeting, I handed out a draft of an alternative. So my hope is that in that meeting, we will take the draft and any types of adjustments that may be made to the draft so that it meets the requirements and the purpose of the resolution.
Any other council committee reports? All right, hearing none, that brings us to the reading of legislation. Jody?
Legislation for first reading. Resolution number 3862 for first reading. Resolution providing a Vision Zero commitment to eliminate fatalities and serious injuries that are a result of crashes on city streets within the city of Bowling Green by 2045. Ordinance number 9182 for first reading. Ordinance amending and adopting Chapter 33 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Bowling Green, Ohio regarding employment policies. Ordinance number 9183 for first reading. Ordinance authorizing the municipal administrator to enter into a lease agreement with BG Dog Parks, Inc. Ordinance number 9184 for first reading. Ordinance amending and adopting Chapter 138 regarding drug offenses and amending and adopting Section 139.10 regarding Clean Air Act of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Bowling Green, Ohio. Ordinance number 9185 for first reading. Ordinance authorizing the Utilities Director to enter into contracts for the design, engineering, and construction of the water treatment plant membrane improvements. Ordinance number 9186 for first reading. Ordinance authorizing the Utilities Director to execute an agreement with the Ohio Water Development Authority, OWDA, or the Ohio EPA Water Supply Revolving Loan Account, WSRLA, program for the design, engineering, and construction of water treatment plant membrane improvements. Ordinance number 9187 for first reading. Ordinance authorizing the Utilities Director to enter into contracts for the raw water reservoir expansion study. Ordinance number 9188 for first reading. Ordinance authorizing the Utilities Director to enter into contracts for the engineering program and construction of substation relay improvements. Ordinance number 9189 for first reading. Ordinance authorizing the Utilities Director to enter into contracts for the purchase and sale of vehicles and equipment and declaring an emergency.
I would like to move to suspend the rules and give ordinance 9189 its second and third reading.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Jody?
Harold,
Yes.
Hollenbaugh,
Yes.
Odoricio,
Yes.
Phipps,
Yes.
Robinette,
Yes.
Sherry,
Yes.
Dennis.
Yes.
It passes. It's been a long day.
Ordinance number 9189 for second and third readings. Ordinance authorizing the Utilities Director to enter into contracts for the purchase and sale of vehicles and equipment and declaring an emergency.
All right, I would like to make a motion to adopt the emergency clause for ordinance 9189.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? I would just like to say that, as was described in the review for the packet, this is an item which is in high demand, and the sooner we engage in our search, better the outcome. So, Jody?
Hollenbaugh,
Yes.
Odoricio,
Yes.
Phipps,
Yes.
Robinette,
Yes.
Sherry,
Yes.
Dennis,
Yes.
Harold.
Yes.
All right, the emergency clause is adopted for ordinance 9189. I would like to move to adopt ordinance 9189.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Jody?
Odericio,
Yes.
Phipps.
Yes.
Robinette.
Yes.
Sherry.
Yes.
Dennis.
Yes.
Harold.
Yes.
Hollenbaugh.
Yes. Ordinance 9189 is adopted.
Legislation for second reading. Ordinance number 9179 for second reading. Ordinance amending and adopting Chapter 155 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Bowling Green, Ohio regarding community investment areas. Ordinance number 9180 for second reading. Ordinance accepting annexation of approximately 2.967 acres of land in Plain Township, Wood County, Ohio, from City of Bowling Green petitioner. Ordinance number 9181 for second reading. Ordinance establishing interim zoning of C, commercial zoning for the approximately 2.965 acres of land located at the southwest corner of Bishop Road and North Dixie Highway, recently annexed to the city as petitioned for by City of Bowling Green. There is no legislation for third reading. Number 9177 comes off the table automatically.
Mr. President,
Ms. Phipps?
I move to adopt ordinance 9177.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Okay. Jody?
Phipps.
Yes.
Robinette.
Yes.
Sherry.
Yes.
Dennis.
Yes.
Harold.
Yes.
Hollenbaugh.
Yes.
Odericio.
Yes.
All right, ordinance 9177 is adopted. At this time, council is going to move into executive session for the purpose of discussing contract negotiations. No action will be taken by council following this meeting.
Second that.
Properly moved and seconded. Jody, could you call the roll?
Robinette.
Yes.
Sherry.
Yes.
Dennis.
Yes.
Harold.
Yes.
Hollenbaugh.
Yes.
Odericio.
Yes.
Phipps.
Yes.
All right. And unlike in past eras, you can all stay here if you want to, although nothing will happen when we return. We are going to leave the room.
Nice.